Hi everyone, welcome to our May webinar series. For those of you who are joining us for the very first time, RISE is a social enterprise that works in Lesotho. Lesotho is a country that is landlocked in Southern Africa. So RISE stands for Relationships Inspiring Social Enterprise, and we host these different webinars on architecture and construction for our in-local fellows who are going through entrepreneurship training, and they get experience through learning by doing, by designing live projects for vulnerable communities. So every month we host this different webinars, inviting different guests all over the world. And this month we have our esteemed guest, Tozama Mputa. Now, Tozama is a director of ASAP Landscape Architect and an assistant landscape design lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Her work explores the relationship between people, pattern, and place. Now, this relationship, she explored through time, through history, her personal story, and the present, while imagining what the future will bring. Now, her favorite quote is that she's aware of the role that she plays in the future of our spaces. And she says that I visually communicate this and use my voice to engage. So, Zamaphuza, welcome very much. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today, and thank you for everyone who's joining.
Thank you very much. I'd also like to introduce my co-host, Queen Moshokakala. Sir.
Thank you very much, Teddy, and thank you everyone for joining in. And thank you again, Tozama, for taking this time to actually do this webinar with us. And I think it's going to be one of the exciting ones. We can't wait to start. But Tozama has also prepared a presentation for us that she would love to take us through. And then we'll have a couple of questions that we are asking her. And please, guys, make sure that you have all the questions that you want to ask. You can post them in the chat box. You can post them also in different platforms that you're listening from. Thank you. Over to you, Tozama.
Thank you, Quinn. Thank you again for everyone who's joining. Thank you, RISE, for inviting me to the familiar names and the new names which I'm seeing pop up. I was lucky enough to visit Lesotho in 2019. Was my first time in Lesotho. I took some film photographs of my experience there. It's a beautiful country, and the first thing I noticed about Lesotho was the lack of fences. It's open, it's fresh, animals roam free, people are walking. There's just a great sense of pedestrians working in the urban areas, not only in the rural areas, but also the urban areas. And I would suggest that if you can visit, and when we are able to visit, that one goes. It's a rich country with a rich cultural heritage, and this is seen in the places that I've visited. I started sketching and really started sketching in my first year at the University of Pretoria, when we were encouraged to have a journal, a sketchbook. I only arrived in Pretoria as a student. I wasn't aware of many places in the inner city, but our subjects allowed us to go visit the inner city to explore, and sketching was how we documented our surroundings. I mean, phones then, it was just simple, small S3s or Blackberries. Camera quality wasn't as good as it's now. So sketching really made us absorb, take notes down while we were walking and exploring. I then used to further develop these drawings. Once I got home, I would then take out my watercolors and paint over it, highlighting certain shapes, certain patterns I saw. And then initially I would just start with a ballpoint pen, anything that was available. I then further took on the exercise of sketching and drawing and observing when I did my master's. I completed my master's at UCT, and I really enjoyed incorporating all the number of sketches I did on tracing paper, scanning them, layering them, and then further seeing what I would see and what I can imagine and what was possible It was always very helpful to then keep all my tracings and all my my sketches to then further use and further developed in other projects. Sketching is very helpful when it comes to mapping. Often we map in projects just to show locality, to show the context of a project, to show the environment that surrounds the site. And not only did this type of sketching influence how I work with space, but then in also other art forms. I really enjoy portraits, looking at old family photographs, and I'd bring in that etching into portraiture. And again, it would just be simply using pen, pencil, whatever was available. If my siblings had then watercolors, I'd then incorporate that. So any material I can find, I would use. For me, sketching is a very simple way of communicating, especially when you work with a number of different communities and different people who are often not in the built environment. I have started learning to use my voice and how to communicate better and express myself. But often speaking, you get very nervous, you get very anxious. But then sometimes what you can't then express, a drawing does that simply. So then I'm bringing in that drawings, the layering, and then also then making use of Photoshop, using the same technique by hand, but then using it in Photoshop, also making use of photographs and also found images from Google. I also think it's always very important to show people and the context of the place you're working in, represent those people of that place, allow the person who's going to be using the site to see them in your interventions. And also it's just a simple veggie patch. This is a design for a school that I did with a group of friends. It's also often always great to collaborate with a group of friends, or if you know someone working on a project in the local community, in a different industry, perhaps there's always a way to collaborate. In work, drawings also have come through to then communicate with clients, to market, to share what you're doing, to incorporate all the types of work and projects you're doing. Often one simple image just to introduce yourself is helpful. I've also enjoyed drawing when it comes to imagine something that often when you're planning a design or when you need to get inspired or when you can't imagine what you designed, sometimes designing and imagining what's there is always helpful because it's possible to then further then develop a concept through construction detailing, through collaboration, etc. And yeah, so these are just some sketches that I've been doing throughout working, studying, and exploring different projects. And then my dissertation in my final master's year further explored my use of drawings to communicate and to develop ideas, working from analog, which was painting, and then seeing how can these sketches be then transformed in a program like SketchUp, where then you can then 3D, you can further develop an idea by 3D modeling, looking at different scales. What can this become? Is this a city? Is this a texture of a playground? Is it as a seating opportunity? So then working in a digital format really helped explore that. Continue with layering just by observing different site movements, different patterns your eye picks up, different forms existing on site, further layering that, then just, yeah, what can you imagine? So yeah, I think words often always help to support words like connect, enhance, celebrate. These are words then can be used to then develop a space further and then further developing that, and then where that connection takes place, perhaps as a pedestrian network, etc. There's many other sources available online where one can then further get inspired by. And this is a book that's been very helpful in looking at how important drawing is with landscape architecture. This is a link of the book, which is available digitally. But I'm sure through our questions and answer session, we'll then be able to further unpack different concepts and ideas and the industry of landscape architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tozama. The lovely presentation. I think it's very, 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 very informative. And I hope people from the architecture field of architecture environment from Lesotho were actually watching. Like I got some few things that I saw, especially with the sketching tips of how to go about it. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll jump straight into the questions. You have a master's degree in the landscape architecture and you received the Mbokoto Awards for Women in the Arts and Architecture category. What inspired you to integrate art and architecture in your approach?
I think that my biggest inspiring moment was just being true to myself. And that was, I knew I was able to communicate with images, with art, and drawings. And once I started bringing that in, it helped me build my confidence in my design, in my sketching, and in my presentation, going to refer to images I've done. And it also made me not afraid of any ideas. I was then able to point to an image. So I think that's just being able to be comfortable in my process. I had to then include the art. That was the main inspiration.
That's actually very quite interesting. I know there's the famous saying that a picture says 1,000 words. So you being able to tell that story with pictures also and with your art, I think also depicts that beautiful 1,000 words that people keep saying about that. Please tell us about Constructing Future Cities research program, because I've been reading about it. And I think a lot of people have also been very curious about it. I have a cousin that's actually working with such stuff. So I think we just have to get a bigger picture of that. Can you tell us more about that?
That was an opportunity by Our Future Cities that I saw, which is a great platform which often always discusses different professions, different projects. They're actually also running a program now with Africa Day, celebrating Africa Day. They're also running a webinar series throughout the week, which everyone should check out. So there was an opportunity in 2017 where they focused on women in the built environment and how they use art to communicate, how they use art to express the role women have in the built environment. And it was the first time I saw an opportunity where I felt confident in applying. Other opportunities were more design-based, more product-based. And this opportunity was one where I felt was a good collaboration with art and the built environment. We were able to go to Durban. There was 3 artists chosen and explore and also meet other professionals, not only women, also men in the built environment at different stages of their career, looking at projects that were proposed. It was very interactive. And then at the end of the session, we presented our work, our findings from the process, also answering questions that were proposed to us.
Okay, thank you very much. I think also what we can do also is just tell people if they want to read more about that or know more about that, where they can find such information, if you don't mind.
Definitely Our Future Cities. And I think that's their handle across social media on Facebook, on Instagram and Twitter.
Okay, thank you very much. I think also from a layman's perspective, people hear about landscape architecture, people hear about garden designs, people also hear about urban and planning architecture. How would you suggest these are different, and how do these professions collaborate professionally together? Can you give us a highlight on that?
I don't think they are very different. I think perhaps the brief, you can just see the brief being different. With a garden can be private and it can be public. And it can be at a different size. It can be a personal garden in someone's home, or it can be then a botanical garden for then the whole community, for visitors in a point of tourism, etc. And then budget then differs. But I think they're very similar. I think it's then how one specializes. Some people then prefer to then focus on specifically garden design, some then on urban design or landscape architecture. And then these are projects that then where professions can collaborate on. A landscaper can collaborate with the urban designer, can collaborate with a landscape architect. So they're not different at all. I think also one of the differences then perhaps scale. An urban designer works with a very large scale where it looks at city, but then city planning, but then they can also look at a road, for instance. So I think one can see it as perhaps they can be positioned to tap into all three spheres if they want, or they can decide then to completely focus on one.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. I think that's also very, very, very important and brings a lot of light to us. The world is constantly changing. And right now, like with the COVID also, like there's a lot of changes that have been happening. What technical skills do landscape architects need or have to further develop to compete in the evolving markets or sustainable design and climate resilience?
I think landscape architects are positioned where they can directly work and communicate with community members. They're not limited to working in the office or for a client. They can go out there, educate people on the importance of open spaces, clean open spaces, accessible open spaces. So I think landscape architects have that tool not only to design, but to educate and to be innovative and push change. I think we have access to community members, we have access to municipalities, government officials, private business people. I think just to then push change, to educate and emphasize the importance of various type of spaces within our communities.
Okay, that's quite interesting. I think with almost everything that humans do, or with everything that we embark on, there are a couple of challenges that we come across. What would be those challenges that you think landscape architects face in the world of today?
I think I also get this way. I get intimidated by other professions, or I get intimidated by other members of the project team, being maybe perhaps your engineers or architects. I think that's a challenge that I just think is very unnecessary. We all an important part of the project team. We all have valuable information to give, and we all are continuously working with one another. So I think we shouldn't be intimidated, and then people shouldn't be intimidated to want to pursue a career in landscape architecture. It's an industry for all. It's fun. I think we forget about how fun it is, how it's something you can enjoy, because the product you pull out or once you finish with the project, it's then something for all to enjoy.
Okay. I love how you answered that question in two sections in your own, in the way that it affects you personally and also as a whole picture. I think that also makes sense. That's a good tone. I think the next questions are just about be inclusive in a whole, and maybe basing them on culture. Like, how do you think culture and history can be integrated into landscape architecture, and also if that's important?
It's very important. I think you've seen in history when certain events happen, whether it's war, forced removals, often what's left is the land or the place, the event that happened. Monuments fall, buildings get destroyed. So what's always left is that background which an event took place, which is your landscape. You can't remove, so even if the evidence isn't there anymore of what took place, it's still there, it's still entrenched in the land. So I think there isn't history without landscape, and there isn't landscape without history. I think our role is then how do we then commemorate, how do we then celebrate, or then how do we then remember certain events? And cultural events are always either on the street. You've seen when there's a wedding, everyone wants to go out on the street, they want to celebrate with others, where everyone can see each other, where they can feel what's happening. So I think that's always something important to consider, especially in an African context. Celebrations are out on the street, they're out in the open, and it involves the whole community.
I totally agree on that. Tozama, I'm just going to pass over again to Teddy to also further have some, he has a few questions that you want to address to you, and then we'll also take questions from the audience. Over to you, Teddy.
Thank you very much, Queen. Tozama, I am learning a lot today. I'm learning a lot. I love the bit that you said when you said landscape architecture. It's not meant to only design; it's also meant to educate. I think I'm taking that with me today. I'd just like to find out, Tozama, how do you feel about women's role in the building industry, especially with the focus?
Hi, Tidi. I heard, I think, the most part of your question about a woman's role. I think there are so many opportunities for women in the building industry, and even on site, working on construction sites. So there's so many opportunities, and I think it's just important for one to be aware of their opportunities and to see where they fit best. A project is made up of different components from the beginning till the end. And then there's so many different spheres one can be part of. And I think women are part of the industry. I think what's important is the acknowledgement of their role they play. And not women just in the industry, just women who make the places we go to or we experience, the everyday woman, from your cleaners, from the women who organize and take care of children in certain areas in your parks. I think it's just important that the communities acknowledge them and see the important role they play.
Thank you very much. But I'd like to find out from you if you think there are some challenges that they're facing in cities today.
I think many of the challenges are, there's lots of challenges, but I think it's more not even in the work. I think it's how perhaps simple things of how you address one another, how you communicate, how you speak to one another. And as a woman, often sometimes, you you dress up for work, and then someone would comment and be like, comment on something you're wearing. And sometimes, you know, it's meant to be a joke, but then you can take it very personally. Like, I was once wearing a shirt, striped shirt, and someone's like, oh, which rugby team are you supporting? But I think sometimes often it's communication is also communication, and respectful communication makes a big difference. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Tozama, you talked about open spaces, all right? So I'd just like to find out from you, because Lesotho has just gone into the blue level. So we are just one level away from green, and we will be hosting public events soon. So I'd like to find out from you how landscape architecture can respond to the health crisis.
I want to say, I think it's so interesting that your levels are colors. I'm guessing green then is basically our level 1. It just shows how green just symbolizes, you know, outside, fresh and new. But I think it's important now I think we've seen the importance of open spaces and perhaps the lack of individuals having access to open spaces, because you think of people who stay in perhaps areas with a small yard or in a high-rise flat apartment building, they didn't have access to open space with all the restrictions. So I think those are conversations that need to be brought forward. I think we need to reflect on how the restrictions affected our movement, our livelihoods, and then I think incorporate that when we're further planning, because this could happen again. And I think events and just the use of open spaces is then to continue that conversation with community members. They're very insightful. They use the spaces every single day. They've seen the patterns. They've seen who wakes up, who passes it, and what affects if there's crime at a certain area. So those conversations with the community need to be ongoing. As they own the space afterwards, it's their space, it's for them to use.
Thank you, Tozama. I love how you want to involve the community and how you refer to inclusivity all the time. Is this what you have to promote in each and every project that you get involved in?
I do. It's often hard because there's often already a structure of how the project goes, but it doesn't stop one from, on site, when you do visit site, when you are involved in the project, to have those small conversations. And sometimes it's even children who start the conversations, and they come up to you and they'd be like, even just say thank you, acknowledging the difference that space makes. So I think even as an individual in your own capacity, speak to people in a respectful manner. If they probably have some insight, they acknowledging the work you've done, you perhaps also acknowledge how they're taking care of a space. So it's even in that manner, I think, what community involvement actually means too.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So do you have any do's and don'ts of landscape architecture?
I think the don't was don't be intimidated by other consultants in the project. I think it was something everyone will learn. And do have fun. I think we often forget to have fun and to sometimes put out our crazy ideas or different ideas. And I think do enjoy the process. From beginning to end, every process, enjoy it.
Thank you, Tozama. That's beautiful advice right there. And I'm pretty sure that our audience right now is writing everything down because those are wisdom bombs. One last question, Tozama, before we head to the questions from the audience. You came to Lesotho back in 2019. From what you remember seeing, what is your
Hi, Teddy. I think when I came to Lesotho, the one thing I noticed. Sorry. One thing I noticed about Lesotho is the pedestrians, how the walkability. It's not a big, Maseru in particular, doesn't have a big city center, but I think what's encouraging about that is that everyone is able to just walk and explore and see as a visitor to the city. I think I also took away the fact that there are no fence. That was really refreshing to me. So there was no boundary. I didn't feel like a sense that there were boundaries to anything. And from the city center, one is able to drive freely to the next town. And how Lesotho has incorporated their history, their landscape. I haven't been able to see the snow yet. And that's one thing that I really do want to go back to, is experience snow. And I've heard that there are even tours one can take on horseback. So I think that, just the fact that the landscape is just the attraction, that means a lot to me and makes me want to go back and explore.
So you should really come to Lesotho and come see the snow.
Yes, yes.
We'll be waiting with open arms for you.
Thank you, thank you. And
all
then
right. I'd like to hand over to there's a couple of questions that we have from. Sorry about that, Tozama. I think my line might be a bit slower, so I'm going to go ahead and hand over to my co-host, Queen.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, Teddy. I hope my line does better also on my side. I think what Tozama has shared with us is something that's very informative. I think, and questions are starting to flog in a lot, and I'd love for everyone to be engaging. But Tozama, I don't know how to pronounce the name. I'm sorry. Is Tybalt Faye has a question about, you spoke about fenceless Lesotho land. What is your impression about the overload of walls, fences in Pretoria and Johannesburg?
Fences, sometimes I think they often, you have that sense that what's over the fence, what's there, what can't I see, what are you hiding? So, I mean, I think you get curious, and then sometimes you wonder if those fences weren't there, I perhaps wouldn't be curious to know what's over there. There'd be transparency, you'd be able to see what's, on the other side of the fence. And then maybe sometimes I think then, will that perhaps maybe be an alternative, and will it be safer if there wasn't a fence? But those are just things I think. In some scenarios and in some cases, I think fences are necessary, but not in all. I think just visual transparency is just is more helpful in some cases than that barrier and staring at a wall. So I think when you look at historical photographs of some of the apartment buildings and the residential areas in Johannesburg and in Pretoria particularly, there were no fences. You were able to see through the block of flats, you were able to see the gardens, and it's just, the street was read so much better. So I think in some areas, maybe we should introduce or consider lowering the fence even, and not having such a high fence. Maybe we just lower it a bit, so then there's that visual transparency and communication.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Faye. Do you have designs helping to integrate it better and make it fast and feel less present?
Do I have designs that
how designs helping to integrate it better? Like, I think that feeling of sense of those walls. Do you have anything that you've worked on? Oh, yes.
I think in some cases, then you look at planting, maybe then a row of trees or a row of low shrubs instead of a fence. So then you have that sense of a barrier, or maybe you directing pedestrians, but then it's maybe the use of trees or even bollards, sculptural elements, just to break that up.
Okay, thank you. We have questions from Felix. A very eloquent and informative webinar from Tozama. How do culture influence your designs, especially the fenceless Lesotho land?
I think community is often made up of a number of households, and they often interact, not only children playing with one another, one household elders taking care of the children in the community. So I guess those culture aspects and elements and practices, basically like that whole thing of, can I borrow sugar? So that relationship one has with their neighbor, it's made easier without certain restrictions. Yeah, and also sometimes when you go home, or when you go visit your family in the rural areas, if one can say, there's an elder sitting on the veranda, and he's sitting and he starts talking. I mean, it's also that sense that there is accessibility to the other generations, where one then can talk, one can pass by and say hi, with that feel of openness allows that.
Okay, thank you. The other question from Felix, I think it speaks to the same one of how do culture influence your designs, where he or she is asking, where do you draw your inspiration from in terms of art and design spaces? Like, where do you get your your inspiration?
So many things, even movies, even music. I Google a lot, or I'll go from one website to another website and just always make note of things I see. I think that whole thing of like having a sketchbook and making notes, I still do it in the sense of, if I see something, I write the name down. If I'm paging through a book, write the name down, and just being able to refer it, even if you've forgotten it and it comes back, it'll come back at a relevant time. So I think it's just curiosity is the big thing. Just always wanting to know, always wanting to find out more information. And then also just conversations with colleagues, friends, family, learning from them is always inspiring.
Okay, that's very good. Movies, magazines, books, I think in everyday life. The other question is also, in what ways do we or can we use landscape architecture to educate society?
I think because we've learned how important certain things are, idea of perhaps open space, clean environment, no pollution, just simple things like that. I think it's making people aware that certain practices or things that they do, to continue with them, to see what simple things they do in their everyday life. How do we improve it, and how do we learn from them? How do we incorporate those activities in our projects? So I think it's just also making aware of people that they already have the skill sets, they already know certain design practices and elements, but perhaps maybe they don't know how to make use of it. Yeah, so I think it's just opening those conversations up.
Thank you, Tozama. I think this one is in the context of Lesotho, but would love to learn maybe in the context from SA, or any context that you think might inform us. Like, for instance, Giselle is saying public spaces, parks, etc., are underfunded in Lesotho. What opportunities do local landscape architects have here at home? I think maybe you can tell us in the context of the places that you know. Because we see that there's not a lot of funding maybe and parks in Lesotho, yes.
I think what's been helpful in the context of South Africa is how, for instance, at some parks, there's a market that takes place that really gets people using the park, it shows how those spaces are appreciated. So maybe if there's an event that can take place, if there's gatherings that can take place to emphasize and show that this is a place that needs to be invested in, that there's opportunities that lie within the park beyond just, your play, etc. I think that's an initiative to get people talking, to get people going and investing in the park. Also make sure you maintain and take care of your parks well as a community. Do not vandalize, do not pollute your park, take care of it. And I think also sometimes there is friends of a park, so a group that's formed. So say there'll be friends of Maseru Park, and that's a group that then make sure the park is well kept, organizes events in the parks, educate people in the importance of the park, and then people are then able to then speak to that group, and then that group is then able then to speak to the government or the officials. So just having someone representing the people of the park, the people who enjoy the park, I think is important.
Thank you very much. I think you pose good questions, not just questions, but good ideas about that. Taking care of parks, or maybe helping with the parks, is not just the work of the government, but people should also feel responsible for that, about having friends of those parks. I think maybe also the advice Giselle is asking for is how do we then, can we engage maybe the governing bodies to invest in public spaces to help create jobs for landscape architects in the context of Lesotho. Also, what is the role of a landscape architect have in town planning? I think those are opinions that you'd love you to help with. I would also want to phrase these questions also to the audience to try and think of how do we engage the government or the governing bodies to also invest in such parks.
I think it even starts when you are a student. When you're a student is when you're learning the most, and when your ideas aren't limited. And I think making people aware of the work you're doing and the work you then can contribute once you're working is important. So get officials to come view your presentations, get them to come crit, get them to perhaps then propose a project, and maybe they then can then be judges of that scheme. But I think it even starts at university, where one shares what they're learning with others, making them aware of the endless possibilities and opportunities parks then bring to society. So I think it's an ongoing conversation, not just for once you are working. In all spheres, start that conversation. Yeah, there are so many questions. Now I feel like I'm even getting lost. But yeah, I think just the conversation must keep happening. Even platforms like this, share it with officials, share it with the government. Don't be afraid of them. I think it's sometimes important to poke at them, you know, or then even be bold, have a campaign perhaps. Yeah.
I think what's important also is that we are recording this, and don't be threatened by questions. I think I'm enjoying these questions because it's also something that's going to raise awareness for a lot of people, and I'm happy that we are actually recording this webinar, because I think a lot of people might have a lot of information that people are also not just supposed to be pointing fingers all the time. They also just have to be looking into themselves and trying to create that social mentality about landscape architects, about what they want also in town planning and some things. But thank you very much, Tozama. There's also one question from Molope. On a scale of 1 to 10, can you elaborate on appreciation of landscape architecture in rural areas?
I think it's a 10, if not a 20. I think, I mean, the fact that, I think one thing is that I've learned is not, and that everyone should know, is that rural doesn't mean underdeveloped or bad. Rural is unique and in its own way. And it's, I mean, rural, there's so much to appreciate from rural areas. We often always look at the bad, but there's also so much to appreciate from it, where one can, where there's opportunity. I guess sometimes it's just knowing how to use the land, because rural is often so much land, but I think now it's just how do we use that land? How do we, what are the opportunities that come? So I think it's very important, and it's something to be proud of, still having that access to rural communities. Perhaps you also stay in a rural area. It's not less than an urban area. Rural areas even have their own urban hubs, their own corner shops. So very unique characters that we can also learn from, But I think with the rural area, then it's important to look at things like pedestrian safety, children walking to school, just making sure that they have safe access to school, crossing of rivers, protection of trees and protection of indigenous species, and then what vegetation and fruit trees then can be introduced to the community, and then where they can work, where they can also get materials, food, etc.
Thank you very much. I think also, like, on saying that, I think it also invokes some certain emotions on about rural areas also, of how underutilized they are. I think one other question that I have also from my side would be, what advice would you give to someone that wants to do landscape architecture? What are the pros and cons of doing landscape architecture from your own views, not necessarily something from a textbook, from your own views, like just being honest, like giving that advice to someone? Yes.
I think with landscape architecture, you are forever learning. You're learning that you then have to still educate people on the role landscape architects play in society. That is, I think it's a pro, because then that means you've also developing with yourself. The exciting thing about landscape architecture is that you're able to learn skills from your project management skills, from your drawing, your design skills. So there's many other spheres you can tap into. It's often, sometimes you feel that we overlooked. It's as if other professions can do what we do. So you're often fighting that, those ideas or those thoughts. But it's evolving, and I think it's a career you can make yourself. and it's a career that you don't remove yourself from. I think I see it in things I do every single day. I incorporate it with travel, exploring other places. I was able to come to Lesotho through my work and just, speaking about what landscape architects do. And I think also in academics, it's a career that also provides opportunity for you to then further teach, further study, always involved with students. And I think it's important that once, in any industry, and once you qualify, know where you came from, know the struggles that you had, and help the younger, not even younger, the other people coming in. So yeah, it's hard, but everything's hard. I enjoy it. I even enjoy the hardships.
Yes, I think we have a saying that you only grow when you have challenges. So the hardships are actually by a source of growing. I'd also like to tell like the the participants also that they should check the chat box. But there's a link there about the questionnaire that they can fill in, and also about ideas about their future cities. Tozama, I think this is a question that we ask a lot also, like when people talk about civil engineering, people talk about architecture, and definitely now thinking about landscape architecture. Do you feel like it's there's a balance between agendas about women and men in this field, or is it a woman-dominated field, or do you feel like it's a men-dominated field? Or what do you think the balance is with the landscape architecture, and what challenges also possess of those, if there's any imbalance?
I think I've been seeing a lot of women coming into the industry, Black women too. I think as we progress as society, as opportunities open up, it's been easier for women to be able to join industries without being intimidated by the so-called that it's man-dominated, etc. I've also seen women take leadership positions. So I think the challenges are getting better, but I think that it's something that we mustn't forget that we should always encourage girls, even young girls, and make them aware that there are so many opportunities present. There's opportunities for you to study, there's opportunities to start your own thing and explore different things, not even within South Africa, but there's opportunities to explore within other African countries and other countries all over. So I think the challenge will be not to stop exposing others to all the possibilities out there. Yeah.
Thank you. Reds also, Retsepile has a question, and I think it's basing through your presentation, which I think was a very lovely presentation, which also most people that are into art would actually enjoy your presentation. But I think he poses a question, a very important question, like with the increasing demand of digital drawings or renderings, how do you insist on the use of sketching after school or university? I think that's a very important question.
I think it's not being afraid to present your ideas through drawings, and to also constantly share the work you do. And often if you even look at other firms or other architects, landscape architects, they often always refer to their initial drawings, which then over time developed to digital drawings. But I think you need to make that space for yourself. You need to be proud of your drawings. Everyone has a unique representation of their ideas. So it's just working on your own unique skills and not being afraid to share that. There's no right or wrong when it comes to drawing, but it is important to keep practicing.
Thank you very much, Tozama. I'd also like to give back to Teddy to try and wrap up. I'd also like to thank you again, Tozama. I think by now it's seems like it's not enough, because I still have a lot of questions that I would love to ask, just to understand a few ideas, and also just to make sure that we have different perspectives of thoughts, because you're in the context of SA, and then we're also having these questions in the context of Lesotho, and I think we can learn a lot by looking at parks, how they've been created in SA, looking at how parks have been created in different worlds outside there. And I think one of the questions that Giselle had about them being underfunded, because one question that I would also want to help before I hand over is, because you spoke about people also being involved, being friends of the parks. What do you think that different communities, especially in rural areas, can start working on or start doing to make sure that they conserve this idea of having parks on also their landscapes?
I think then that also, I think collaboration is then important. So even if from rural areas to then they can share ideas and get information and get inspired by those friends of the park. Those friends of the park can then get inspired. So it's vice versa. But I think it's also important to then recognize a leader, a member of the community or committee, then oversees that and runs through processes. So I think it's just maybe the mobilization, if you say, or getting a few people together to then run certain processes. And I think like this conversation needs to then continue. So as you say, you have more questions to ask me, then we continue this conversation and not just let it be within this webinar. Often the webinars, once I'm done, then I'll be like, oh my God, I should have said that, I forgot that, etc. So then I think the conversation afterwards.
Definitely, yeah. I do agree with that. I'd love to hand over back to Teddy to try and wrap up. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Queen. Wow, I have learned a lot today. I have learned a lot, and I'm also getting messages, through my personal WhatsApp that there's people who are joining us who are also learning a lot, and they're not even architects, but they have learned a lot. Thank you very much, Tozama, for talking about infusing art and architecture and using art to express yourself, and also, talking about the design of future cities and how to address the challenges that women are facing in architecture and how to address these challenges. So you can find more on this on our future cities. That's our futurecities.co. I've also talking about involving the communities because these are the people who use the landscape that the architects develop, so that they can have that sense of ownership. And for also talking about for also mentioning that landscape architecture is not only meant to design, but it's also meant to educate. So, with landscape architecture, you are a student for life. So let's keep exposing those opportunities to learn. This has been a fantastic webinar. If you'd like to watch it again, you'll find it on our Facebook page. That's RISE International. That's Relationships Inspiring Social Enterprise. Find it on Facebook. You'll also find a recording of this webinar on YouTube. So remember to fill in that survey, that webinar survey in the chat box and in the comments on Facebook to let us know how we can improve the future webinars and what topics you'd like us to talk about in the future. Please join us next time on the 24th of June. And from myself, from RISE team, from Queen and Tozama, thank you very much again for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day and see you on the 24th of June.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.